Can I ask?
Thank you. Yes.
Just a comment regarding the drought task force. Are these actions long-term? Because kind of going back to what Larry was saying, I know the task force is reactionary to the drought, and so you're looking at solutions to address the issues. But are they viewed as long-term issues? Because if it begins to rain and we have a lot of rain and we think we have a lot of water, I mean, are they sustainable? I mean, is that the perspective of the task force to look at sustainability rather than just being reactionary to the drought?
I think that's a good question, and I think it's an important one because I think it's as those of us that are involved with emergency management, we look at after action reports, and so to kind of boil it down to my day job. So we need to record what's working and what's working, or why things have happened, so we can go back after this drought is over and say, okay, how do we prevent this the next time? So I think when I go back as being kind of the new guy to drought emergency operations or drought response, you go back and look at what did we do in 76, what did we do in 2009, and did we do those things that we said we were going to do? And I think as was mentioned before, after 76, 77, Southern California learned a hard lesson. And they spent a couple $2 billion, and they're now in a better spot. Hopefully they're in a spot where they can assist others that are in a hard spot. That's important right now. But that's a good example. And there's other areas actually in the North Bay that have done the same thing. They've built interties. They built those relationships. It's going to be tight if we don't get rain, but they can make it through without some of the other impacts that we're hearing in other areas of the state. So the key will be, though, to answer your question, they're mostly short-term or mid-term actions. But to come out of this process, there's a recovery plan. And that recovery part of the process needs to identify all of those actions that we need to put on the table and hopefully implement.
And you're right, Southern California should assist. So I agree with you. Thank you.
Any other? Hank?
Bill, rather than see our way through this, I'm seeing it into it, and I'm looking at, say, 6 months in the future, say June, July. Your reservoirs are out of water. You've got 4 or 5 cities, towns that are out of water, and you've got no rain in the foreseeable future, not maybe until January, February. How do you treat those towns that are out of water? What do you do?
How do you treat
the towns that are out of water? What are you going to do for them?
That's where the emergency process kicks in. And that's some of the advanced planning that we need to start doing now. And so that's how much would they need, where would they get it for, and how do we get it to them? As worst case scenario, we're already dialoguing informally with FEMA and Army Corps of Engineers. That's kind of the mechanics of getting it done. But you're actually looking at temporary pipelines, trucking water, those kinds of mechanisms if you're in a situation where you don't have any adjacent water supplies that you can tap into.
Well, I guess it depends on the scope of the problem, how many people and all the rest of that. You got to prioritize the needs. But where are you going to get the water? I mean, you can't truck it in, I wouldn't think. That's not a viable solution for a period of time, months, when more and more towns are running out of water. Where do you get it?
Yeah, you're going to get it from wherever you can get it.
Where's that?
A challenge. I think when we saw the water issue come up in Virginia here recently.
West Virginia.
Yeah, West Virginia. That was a good, for me as an emergency manager, I'm looking at, okay, what is the process to, when do decisions need to be made, and how do you sustain that mechanism? So where do you get the water? It's going to be, we have to get the water from wherever we can get it.
That's a frightening reply.
Yeah.
I mean, in West Virginia, they had plenty of water. Some of it was bad, some of it was good. It was a question of getting the good water to replace the bad water. But here we got no water in the scenario that I'm painting. And you're saying we don't know what the answers are, but we're going to think about them and come up with something.
I don't think that's what I'm saying. I'm saying we're going to get water where we do have water. So on the Central Coast, they've in the past looked at desalination. So if we lose our groundwater, surface water, you're going to go to the ocean. It's going to be expensive, and we bring in the mobile plants and fire them up. To the extent that you have the ability to move water, we're looking at a mission task right now in the Mendocino County. So it's going to be moving water from a a location that needs treatment, that they don't have the ability to treatment, to a treatment plant that doesn't have water. So then they push some of the water back to the people that need the water. And so those are the kind of things that we are looking at now, is based on those risks or impacts we've seen in the past, and reaching out to them and saying, are you implementing your conservation plans for the long term? Because the farther we get through the season, the less likely we are to get rain.
So you're talking about billions of dollars.
Well, it all depends on...
Depending on the scope. But you need the facilities, you need the mobile desal plants and all the rest of that. Now, is there a possibility of trading off? I mean, the Sierras have virtually no rain, but the Rockies have a lot of snowfall. And I think it's ironic because we seem to be in better shape in Southern California and San Diego because we take a higher percentage from the Colorado, and the Colorado is in pretty good shape. Can you trade off there, or is all of that water from the Colorado pretty much spoken for?
Well, I think those in Southern California would probably say that they're the Colorado's spoken for. But again, this gets back to, I'm not sure how you would get the water north, but that becomes, from an engineer perspective, it's an engineering problem, and then you got to go find the money to do it.
Yeah, I guess you wouldn't take it north. You'd take it from the northern part before it goes south.
If you have water to move south.
Exactly.
If you don't have water to move south, that part of the equation doesn't work.
I probably won't sleep for a while.
Okay, Larry, and then Phil.
One final rant. I was going to mention West Virginia. Here's an example. Nobody had ever had this type of chemical get into the water source. It did. And then several 100,000 people are basically, don't touch that water. Luckily, it only lasted a very short time. I'm sure those people thought it was a lifetime, the week or more that they didn't have water. But again, lack of planning, lack of the redundant systems that we should be having. I remember in '76 when Marin County's water supply ran across the San Rafael Bridge in I thought a pretty little tiny pipe, but that was basically what Marin was doing. Everybody says, well, I'm against flooding, so we'll build levees and fix them, and that'll be fine. But then when it comes to the appropriation portion of the equation, we don't appropriate sufficient funds. Then you have a levee failure, and you get to go in and spend $100 million instead of spending a few $1 million on maintaining the levees. I'm afraid this water situation is similar when it comes to drought. We talk a good game, we write a bunch of good reports, but when it comes to appropriating the ongoing funding that's necessary to have the emergency plan written and practiced so that you don't have to say, what are we going to do? Unfortunately, it's the way we are as a species and how we govern ourselves.
Phil?
Mr. Crow, the governor and your boss at DWR must be mad at you for something to give you this new assignment, but it's pretty clear that they have very high regard for your talent for what will be a damn impossible and generally thankless job. And I just want to say, in many ways, I think you're going to be able to handle the short-term stuff painfully, but you'll handle it. What bothers me is what Larry pointed out, is we tend to think that we just wait out a problem and it requires no real changes. And I got a suggestion for you and then a couple of queries. I think the most difficult job you're going to have is telling an understandable story of what you're doing. You didn't hear Mr. Goring's presentation, but it was a well-balanced and comprehensive discussion of regional stuff. And if you didn't know a lot about the Sacramento region, it's hard to keep up with all the communities and the trades here and all of that. But it's worse at the state level because you have whole areas of the state which are not in a crisis situation, which is always true, but by and large, people tend to believe whatever they're facing is whatever anybody's facing. So, understandable story, and you've got to prove the fairness of what you're doing. which is why, I think it was Larry's earlier point, the notion of clearly indicating that damage from dry years is damage to human uses of water, it is damage to the environment, and it is not simply the loudest voice complaining in public being ignored or something like that. Those are really difficult. But I think if you do the job right, you have the chance of also leaving a legacy of some things that make the next iteration of a drought response, whether it's next year, 3 years from now, 7 years, 12 years, 15 years, whatever, more intelligent or better informed. And here's some suggestions. The only thing you can do in short order, the clearest thing you can do in short order, is kick ass and get federal state agencies to cooperate. But basically, you're moving local water agencies who control much of the decision making, and if the PPIC figures are correct, spend 86% of all the money spent in this state for water, wastewater, and flood control annually. And at some point, you're going to have, the state can't do it all by itself, and local agencies have to do it. I think the fairest decision is everybody has to pitch in at all levels at all time, and you'll hear all the endless complaints. So, Met will say, well, we've done it. That's why we're in good shape. And that is correct, but not as relevant as it is. Mr. Goring explained that Sacramento, the folks in the coalition are doing a wonderful job. Sure, but many of the coalition members are continuing to use water at significantly higher levels than the statewide average and show no wild enthusiasm about changing that over the long run. Roseville, Folsom, even Sacramento. I mean, 300 gallons per person per day use is pretty damn high when the state average is about 185 gallons per person per day. The other thing is, I've been going back and reading what lessons did we learn from the previous drought papers put out by DWR, and I read carefully the 76-77 drought thing that then Director Roby had signed off on. But the thing that impressed me more was some of the comments in the 2010 review of the drought of 2007 and 2009. And one of the things that was recommended there, and I hope you don't lose it, is they recommended we've got to go back and look at the assumptions on climate and precipitation that are written into the foundational principles of water contracts, of water rights, of operational agreements. And they referenced, in fact, the Colorado River settlement as a clear example where nobody knew it at the time, but the estimations of water that would be available that was necessary to close the deal was at the high end of the precipitation scale. And the end result is this incredible echoing sound throughout 70 years of history that says, well, you said you were going to get it. And unless the Department of Interior is going to give everybody lots of money that they can convert into water, the reality is those assumptions that have to be brought into question by a drought and adjusted. And so just from my point of view, and I'd like to get your reaction, you're engaged in an art form. This ain't no science. This is an art form, and it's really difficult. And it sounds like it is the most difficult, but also in many ways the most important thing you will have been asked to do in your capacity. How are you going to balance it all and move people forward and get the information we know we need? I looked at both reports. They said, here are the information we don't have, and there have been a couple of changes, but man, nobody wants to provide information to the state agencies on how they use water. Nobody. How are you going to simultaneously solve the short problems, not get too lost in details, and lay the foundation for a more rational future?
Yeah, well, first of all, I hope we have better tools. We certainly can forecast a little farther out than we have in the past. We'd like to go a lot farther, but I think when my state climatologist turns to me and said he's worried about the ice pack on Hudson Bay, I'm like, what? Why do I care about Hudson Bay? And
Right.
But so those are the kind of on the edge of where they're pushing the envelope to really take a more of a global view and track. And so they're trying to what I call shrink the air bars down so we get more comfortable with the information that we're trying to process.
Shrink the air bars down.
So-
Shrink the air bars
Make
down?
it a little tighter so we're
Air oars, errors. Okay, got it. Okay.
So, but I think that, this does require. This is where we're going to test ourselves. This has got to be team ball. This is not the Department of Water Resources or the state water resources. This is about all of us at all levels of government, kind of getting in the groove that we can all work together and solve this problem, and hopefully not just during this dry set. We've got to come out of this going, okay, this one hurt. We're going to need to change a few things. And as I went through, with some of us in the department went through the flood futures report, where we went out statewide and looked at flood futures report. As I jump into this, my first thought was, where's my water supply futures report? Because when you look at that from a flood control or water supply, you're really looking at it's all levels of government have a role here.
Right.
And I would agree that most of the water supply stuff is driven at the local level, whether it's a planning issue, an infrastructure issue, or whatever.
Right.
And in the end, when you turn and look to the state to solve your problems, that's a problem. Okay, so we need to be involved in regional stuff, where obviously the department's part of moving water around the state, not just north to south, but east and west. And we have a lot of partners to do that, like our reservoir operators. They don't like to share information for various reasons, but we need to continue to work forward to doing what real-time operations, real-time information. I think some of the new tools that we have are web pages. Just in a matter of hours, with the governor's proclamation, there was huge updates and information flowing that would normally be a letter in the mail, phone call. Instantly, all of California and the nation had access to more information of what California is doing, and it's being continuously updated. And that's information that we need to take home, whether it's to our business, to our farm, to our family, and really factor that in. But that being said, it's I would say the bureaucracy of all of this, the positions, make it difficult, I think, as we work through, and that's where sometimes I feel like I got a flat nose. But I think we got to keep working through this, to try to really make sure we learn from some of the lessons that we're unfortunately going to write down right now. Looking back at some of the 2009 reports, to me that's the most recent.
Right.
But we do need to realize that some things we got done and some things we didn't get done. And we really need to recognize that and make sure that that doesn't happen as we step out of this setting, whether that's next month or next year.
And that report, interestingly enough, cited the package of bills in 2009, creation of the council and the co-equal goals, as one of the steps that tries to balance your approach, which, of course, I'd urge you to consider as you move forward. Anyway, thank you for doing this.
I was thinking, too, Mr. Eisenberg, that, I'm 63 now. I think I've been through 2 droughts of the centuries and 300-year floods in my life. And
You caused all of them?
No,
okay.
I've observed them and been affected by them. And I'm not a great student of past droughts. I know when we learned about floods is when you really look at the outcome of the great floods on the Mississippi in the last 2 decades, what the outcome was, besides the damage of the disaster itself while it was occurring, they accelerated change that was already underway. Communities that were struggling and shrinking, they struggled more and shrank quicker, but the towns that were poised to succeed as a result of the drought, they succeeded more, had more success, and people who were already engaged in smart use of their waterfronts, they left the drought with an even smarter waterfront. So I think when we listen to these themes here, it's that same question. I think those folks who are paying attention and doing their jobs, the agencies got smart people, they're working well, they're working together. We've heard that, whether it's mutual aid or the experience of the Water Forum. Some of our infrastructure investments during a period like this, they're one-time investments and we don't take advantage of them, but some are permanent improvements, the efficiencies we build into our farms and factories and homes.
Right.
A lot of those will stay, and the regional infrastructure, a lot of it stays. And a little thought, too, about what the recovery looks like. What's the drought recovery program? And that probably would be effort well spent, too, because that's what will lock in the beneficial changes that have occurred. Perhaps is some thinking now about how that might work.
I think we've covered this very thoroughly.
Can I ask just one more question before you close it, Mr. Chairman?
All right. Hank, proceed.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say you're a man of tremendous courage because you understand everything that can happen. And I just hope that the state's paying you a lot of money. Now, the real comment, you all have the vision to see beyond this drought and to look at the good things that are going to happen as a result of getting through it. If this is, as the Berkeley professor said, the biggest drought in 500 years, it is really going to be doomsday scenario. And I think going back to what you were saying, Bill, about we'll get the water where we can, a lot of people, when they don't know how long this drought is going to last, don't want to put themselves at risk of running out of water too. And you could really have some local territorial fights on here. And, if the state is not wise in making the right calls and explaining, communicating why the calls are made and all the rest of that, you could be talking about a revolution.
On that happy note,
It's your first day.
Craig, you began by saying extraordinary times require extraordinary actions. And you've all made it clear that we're in an extraordinary time. And you have all described a number of things that are currently underway, potentially could be underway to help us get through this. Delta Stewardship Council pledges our support in any way that we can to assist in cooperating, helping to communicate and coordinate, because that's what we exist to do. And we will continue to keep our eye focused on the long term. The comprehensive sets of solutions that are called for in the Delta Plan, based on what we've learned from previous years, to help continue to call light on what is necessary investment-wise to get us through times like this a little better in the future. But for now, we're grateful that all of you are on it. Thank you for coming and sharing with us today, and keep us informed as to how we might help. Thank you. Yay. And we'll take a 10-minute break now while we reset.